Here's the crazy thing about Apollo 11, it was 8 days that changed what humans thought was possible. July 16, 1969. Saturn V rising over Florida. Launch roaring into the sky. 3 astronauts ride a controlled explosion toward the moon: Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins. The plan sounds simple: get there, land, walk, come home. But the margins are razor thin. 4 days later, July 20th at 20:17:39 UTC, lunar module to Sea of Tranquility. Alarms ping, fuel runs low. Armstrong takes manual control, skimming over boulders to find a safe spot. Contact light. They've done it. Humans have landed on another world. Collins, alone in lunar orbit, the most isolated person alive, circling above while his crewmates prepare to step outside. Quiet, methodical, tense. July 21st at 02:56:15 UTC, the moment. Armstrong backs down the ladder, tests the last rung, sets a boot into ancient dust. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. 15 minutes later, Aldrin joins him. Magnificent desolation. 2 hours, 31 minutes, 40 seconds on the surface. 1 EVA, packed. They plant the US flag. They deploy experiments, a seismometer, a laser reflector. They scoop and bag 21.55 kilograms of lunar rock and soil. Samples that would rewrite what we know about how the moon formed. Every breath is planned. Suits, hoses, checklists on the wrists. Rehearsed 1,000 times on Earth because mistakes here have no margin. After 21 hours, 36 minutes, 21 seconds, time to leave. Ascent stage fires. The little craft rises on a spark of fuel to chase the command module. Docking. Precise, beautiful engineering. Collins welcomes them back. Home, 3 days away. They hit Earth's atmosphere in a blaze. Splash down. Quarantine. Crew and rocks sealed to guard against lunar microbes. There aren't any, but the caution is part of the story. Curiosity balanced with care. August 1969. A victory lap. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Millions cheering. The real celebration is quieter. A promise kept. In 1961, Kennedy set the goal: land on the moon before the decade's end. Apollo 11 delivered. A defining moment in the space race. What I love most, not just where we went, but how we got there. Thousands of people solving impossible problems. 2 footprints pressing into dust untouched for billions of years. That's the leap. And it still echoes. Houston, Tranquility Base here. You know the line. But long before that crackly transmission, there were 3 test pilots born in the same year, 1930, getting ready to bet everything on a 250,000-mile trip. Meet the prime crew of Apollo 11. Commander, Neil Armstrong, second spaceflight. Command module pilot, Michael Collins, second spaceflight. Lunar module pilot, Edwin Buzz Aldrin, second spaceflight. All 3 were seasoned test pilots. Armstrong had flown with the US Navy in the Korean War, but by Apollo 11 he was a civilian NASA engineer pilot. Collins and Aldrin were US Air Force officers. Armstrong and Aldrin, combat experience in Korea. Here's why that matters. Apollo 11 was only the second time an American crew was entirely made of astronauts who'd already flown. Apollo 10 did it first. The next time wouldn't come until STS-26, almost 20 years later. Each of these guys had already wrestled a spacecraft and won. Armstrong commanded Gemini 8 in March 1966. That flight achieved the first ever manual docking between 2 spacecraft. Then, disaster. A stuck attitude thruster sent the docked vehicles into a terrifying spin. At 1 revolution per second, your eyes can barely track the cockpit. Armstrong coolly undocked, fired the re-entry thrusters, and stopped the tumble. The mission ended early, but the calm under pressure? Unmistakable. Collins flew Gemini 10 with Commander John Young in July 1966. It was the first rendezvous with 2 different target vehicles in one mission. And Collins? He went outside twice. On 1 EVA, he literally transferred from one spacecraft to another, spacewalking across the void, hand over hand, before spacewalking was routine. Aldrin piloted Gemini 12 with Commander Jim Lovell in November 1966. He performed 3 spacewalks totaling 5.5 hours. He treated EVA like a test pilot treats a flight card. Procedures, rest cycles, handholds. His work basically rewrote how astronauts do spacewalks without exhausting themselves. So by the time Apollo 11 rolls around, you've got a civilian commander who's stared down a deadly tumble, a CMP who's rendezvoused twice and floated between ships, and an LMP who literally wrote the playbook for working outside. Same age, different paths. One moon. Backup crew? Commander James Lovell. Command Module Pilot William Anders. Lunar Module Pilot Fred Hayes. Lovell had 3 flights, Gemini 7, Gemini 12, and Apollo 8, the first crewed mission to the moon. Anders flew Apollo 8 too, that iconic Earthrise. Hayes hadn't flown yet, but he'd prove his mettle later. Support crew kept the machine humming. Thomas Mattingly, Ronald Evans, John Swigert, William Pogue, names you'll hear again across Apollo and shuttle history. One choice that made Armstrong first. How rotation reshuffles and pure chance picked the first moon crew. Here's the twist in the Apollo story almost nobody tells. The first people on the moon weren't just the best, they were the best placed. Summer 1968. The plan is clean. McDivitt, Scott, Schweikart trained to test the lunar module in Earth orbit. Borman, Collins, Anders prepare to test it in very high Earth orbit. Backups are set. Conrad, Gordon, Bean, for McDivitt's crew. Armstrong, Aldrin, Hayes for Borman's. Deke Slayton ran a simple rotation. Backup today, prime in 2 flights, usually the third. By that logic, the first landing? Conrad, Gordon, Bean. Then everything changes. NASA decides Apollo 8 will fly to the moon without a lunar module. McDivitt says no. He spent a year mastering the lander and won't toss that aside. Frank Borman says yes. He's all in on a lunar flyby. Crews shuffle. That shuffle cost Charles Pete Conrad his shot at being first. He'd become third, commanding Apollo 12. Meanwhile, the Apollo 8 backup crew, Armstrong, Aldrin, Hayes, moved to the front of the line. They're now perfectly positioned. If Apollo 9 and 10 go well, there's evidence Deke Slayton offered Borman the first landing, swapping him in ahead of Armstrong, Aldrin. He declined. January 9, 1969. At a press conference, Borman says Apollo 8 was his last flight. He'd promised his family. That same day, Armstrong's crew is named Prime for Apollo 11. From that moment, barring trouble on 9 or 10, history is basically set. Michael Collins' path is its own shuffle. He trained over a year for Apollo 8 as the lunar module pilot. NASA didn't want rookie Bill Anders solo in the command module while the other 2 flew the lander. So Collins and Anders swap seats. Collins becomes command module pilot. Then a neck injury, herniated disc, pulls Collins off Apollo 8. Jim Lovell takes his place and rides that legendary first lunar orbit mission. Collins gets surgery, heals, and returns, slotting into Apollo 11, replacing Fred Hayes, who hadn't flown yet. If not for that swap and that surgery, there's a world where Collins walks on the moon and Aldrin stays upstairs. Buzz Aldrin's road looks unlikely until it isn't. He never made a prime Gemini crew. He was backup on Gemini 10. Gemini 12 was slated as the last. Then tragedy. Gemini 9's prime crew, Elliot C. Charles Bassett, die in a crash. The lineup shifts. Aldrin pairs with Jim Lovell. He flies Gemini 12. He nails 3 spacewalks. He earns a spot backing up Apollo 8. That puts him right behind Armstrong for the landing. So how were astronauts selected? Yes, training discipline, calm under pressure. But also timing medical notes, a sudden program change, a family promise, and a commander who said yes when another said no. History didn't pick one hero. It picked a lineup, then shuffled the deck until only one draw remained. And on that day, the card on top read, Armstrong, Collins, Aldrin. That's how the first moon crew got chosen. Not fate, just 1,000 small decisions made right on time.
The first man on the moon. The real reason Neil stepped first. Myth. Buzz Aldrin was supposed to step first. During Gemini, spacewalks were done by the pilot, not the commander. Reporters assumed the same rule would apply. Early drafts even said the pilot would exit first. But the hardware had the final word. The lunar module hatch opened inward with the hinge on the right. The commander sat on the left, the pilot on the right. And in a pressurized suit with a backpack the size of a small fridge, the pilot would have to climb over the commander, twist around and squeeze past the hinge. They rehearsed it. The mock-up got scuffed. Not good. Enter Donald Deke Slayton, chief of the astronaut office. He said the commander should go first. Standard protocol. The commander could reach the hatch without a circus act. Leadership backed the order, and that was that. Did Neil Armstrong pull strings? Slayton said no, categorically. Neil said no one asked his opinion. Buzz wrote he was fine with Neil going first. Some experts stayed skeptical, but the official process didn't hinge on lobbying. George Lowe explained the timeline. June 27, 1969, an AP reporter called him at night. Over the years, NASA weighed options. One astronaut out, both out, who first, in what sequence. But only one plan was approved. In April 1969, the Flight Crew Operations Directorate recommended it. Lowe thought Neil probably contributed, but he didn't have the final say. So why does the myth persist? Patterns are powerful. Gemini set a precedent. Pilots did EVAs. The media amplified that pattern, and people imagined coin tosses or backroom deals. In reality, it came down to safety, access, and mission success. At 02:56 UTC on July 21, 1969, Neil Alden Armstrong stepped out first. He put his boot on the moon. Buzz followed minutes later. Lesson: heroes matter, but procedures matter too. The moon was conquered by people and checklists. If you liked busting this myth, I've got more. Hit subscribe and tell me which space story you want untangled next. Thanks for watching. Stay curious.
Launch Day, Wednesday, July 16th, 1969, 13:32 UTC. 3 humans sit atop a 110-meter-tall Saturn V, a machine that burns kerosene and liquid oxygen fast enough to empty a backyard pool every second. And the world is watching. There are 5,000 dignitaries at Kennedy Space Center: Lyndon Johnson, Spiro Agnew, Herman Oberth, and 3,297 members of the press on a dedicated podium. The countdown hits 0. Ignition, liftoff. There's some applause, but mostly silence as Apollo 11 climbs and vanishes into the Florida sky. Live broadcasts beam out to 33 countries across 6 continents. Around 25 million people in the United States tune in. Soviet TV mentions it later. Not live. 11 minutes, 42 seconds after launch, the numbers get precise. Velocity, 7.79 kilometers per second. Altitude, about 190.8 kilometers. Apollo 11 is now a bright dot in a nearly circular Earth orbit, and the first day of flight begins. They complete roughly 1.5 orbits. Over the Pacific, the third stage lights again for 5 minutes, 47 seconds. The target, near escape velocity, 10.84 kilometers per second. Trajectory, the moon. Now comes orbital choreography. The command and service module, Columbia, has to separate, turn, and dock with the lunar lander, Eagle. Michael Collins slides into the left commander's seat for the maneuver. He pulses the attitude thrusters, backs away about 30 meters, rotates 180 degrees, lines up, docks, precisely. With Columbia and Eagle securely latched, the crew extracts the lander. They drift to a safe distance. From Earth, a final command fires the third stage one last time, sending that massive spent booster on a solar orbit past the moon. The astronauts don't actually see the burn, their orientation's off. But they later spot the stage as a tiny glint, already kilometers away. Back on Earth, President Nixon declares, Monday, July 21st, a national day of participation. Government offices will be closed. Local governments and businesses across the country sign on. Inside the spacecraft, there's a quieter milestone. At Neil Armstrong's suggestion, they make an unscheduled TV broadcast. It's recorded at Goldstone in California and piped to Mission Control in Houston. The camera is color. The image is crisp. For just over 16 minutes, viewers see what the crew sees. Earth at a distance of about 95,000 kilometers. 7/8 of the planet is lit. An almost full disk. The eastern Pacific gleams. You can pick out most of the United States. Mexico, Central America, and the northern shoulder of South America. It's a geography lesson in real time from a moving spacecraft. Then a quiet, clever trick: passive thermal control. To keep the spacecraft from baking on one side and freezing on the other, they set it into a slow roll, about 3 revolutions per hour. In space, sometimes the best thermostat is rotation. Mission Control runs the numbers. Course looks good. They skip the first mid-course correction entirely. That saves fuel and, more importantly for a human crew, time. The rest period starts 2 hours ahead of schedule, 11 hours, 20 minutes into the flight. So if you map day 1 by milestones, it reads like this: 0100, liftoff, 0111:42, Earth orbit achieved. About 1.5 orbits later, translunar injection, a 5-minute 47 burn to near escape velocity. Minutes after, docking with the lunar module, extraction complete. Later, third stage sent to heliocentric orbit, around 95,000 kilometers from Earth. An unscheduled 16-minute color TV broadcast. Continuous, passive thermal control at roughly 3 rolls per hour. 11 to 20 flight time, early lights out. From thunderous roar to quiet drift, the first day compresses engineering, navigation, media, and human routine into a single arc. A launch watched by tens of millions. A velocity that rewrites what fast means. A planet shrinking in the window. Day 1 concludes not with a cheer, but with a checklist ticked and a cabin dimmed. The moon is now not just a destination, but a course already flown. Moonshot: how Apollo 11 chose where to land. Alright, quick countdown on how you pick a safe spot to land on the moon. 1. Start with history. The USSR's Luna probes proved you could touch down softly, and NASA's Surveyor landers proved you could send photos back. Those robotic scouts mapped hazards and surface strength, so Apollo wouldn't be guessing. 2. Draw the box. Early Apollo missions flew a free return path. Miss lunar orbit insertion and you still slingshot back to Earth. That safety net meant landing sites had to be on the moon's near side, in a strip about 300 km wide by 2,400 km long, between 5° north and 5° south latitude, and between 45° east and 45° west longitude. If it wasn't in the box, it wasn't on the list. 3. Spend fuel like it's gold. Every meter per second of velocity cost propellant. Sites needed to minimize plane changes, braking, and hovering. 4. Make it flat and boring. Beautiful scenery is dangerous. Apollo wanted relatively smooth mare plains. Few big craters, fewer boulders. The target, a parking lot on a world made of potholes. 5. Keep the approach clean. No tall hills, no sharp rims, no deep craters in the radar's line of sight. If terrain confused the landing radar, the computer could get bad numbers. Bad numbers and lunar gravity don't mix. 6. Cap the tilt. The lunar module's legs could handle only so much lean. The overall slope had to be under 2 degrees, so when the dust settled, the spacecraft wouldn't. 7. Have backups ready. Westward. Launch slips happen. To avoid waiting almost a month for the same lighting to return, alternates were placed west of the primary site, so a delayed launch still lined up with sunrise over a different target. 8. Aim for perfect lighting. Not noon, not night. Early lunar morning. The sun had to sit about 5 to 14 degrees above the horizon, rising from the east. Low sun means helpful shadows to read the ground, but not so low they're mile-long traps. Too high, and you get no shadows and oven-level heat. These conditions lasted roughly 16 hours per site and repeated every 29.5 days. 9. Watch the clock. Each specific landing area had a roughly 66-hour launch window from Earth. Miss that, and you switch to the backup site to keep the sun and the spacecraft aligned. 10. Decide with data. Ranger crashes gave close-ups. Lunar orbiter mapped with high-res photos. Surveyor actually touched the soil. In mid-1963, the hunt began. By 1967, a commission compiled 30 candidates, then cut them to 5. Now, where did Apollo 11 actually go? Nearly on the lunar equator, southwestern Mare Tranquillitatis, the Sea of Tranquility. Coordinates 0 and 41 0 and 15, N 23 26 E. It checked the box. Near side, flat mare basalt. Clean radar approach, gentle slope, right sun angle, economical trajectory. And if the countdown slipped, 2 backups. First, Sinus Maidi, just west of Mare Tranquillitatis, almost dead center on the lunar disk. Second, farther west in Oceanus Procellarum, southeastern region. Westward backups meant the same launch could still chase sunrise across the moon. Put it together and you get the most unglamorous recipe for one of the most glamorous moments in history. A small, flat, well-lit patch of ancient lava, carefully timed, patiently photographed, perfectly boring, so that 2 humans could make it extraordinary. That's how you choose a landing area on the moon, with a box on a map, a stopwatch, a sun angle, and a whole lot of homework. The footprints? Those were the easy part. Lunar liftoff and docking. Immediately after ascent, the astronauts began preparing for liftoff. They spent a total of 21 hours, 36 minutes, and 21 seconds on the moon. The lunar module's ascent engine ignited as planned at 124 hours, 22 minutes into the flight. For the first 10 seconds, the Eagle rose vertically. Aldrin saw through his window how the jet blast sent small pieces of the descent stage's insulation flying in all directions, and the flag they had planted fell. When the velocity reached 12 ms, the spacecraft pitched forward 50 degrees to begin increasing horizontal speed. 7 minutes later, the Eagle entered an intermediate orbit with a paraloon of 17 kilometers and an apoloon of 87 kilometers. About an hour after liftoff, with both spacecraft over the far side of the moon, Armstrong fired the attitude control thrusters. The lunar module entered a nearly circular orbit, with its perihelium rising to 83.3 kilometers. 3.5 hours after liftoff, several more successive maneuvers resulted in Eagle and Columbia approaching within 30 meters and hovering motionless relative to each other. To get a better view of the lunar module's ascent stage, Collins asked Armstrong to rotate the spacecraft slightly. This maneuver resulted in the so-called folding of the 3-axis gyroscope frames in Eagle's navigation system. Collins then manually performed the final approach and docking. Before the rendezvous, a strong circular motion of the spacecraft relative to each other occurred. This was caused by the firing of Eagle's attitude control thrusters, which maintained its orientation. Collins managed to stabilize the ships and complete the docking, although he was already considering a second attempt. He then inflated the transfer tunnel, opened the hatch, and handed Armstrong and Aldrin a vacuum cleaner. They cleaned the spacesuits and everything that was to be transferred to the command module as best they could. Collins became the 3rd person to see lunar soil. Armstrong, without opening it, showed him the package with the emergency samples. Shortly after Armstrong and Aldrin transferred to the command module, the Eagle ascent stage was jettisoned. It remained in orbit, but was eventually expected to fall to the moon. Collins brought Columbia to a safe distance with a 7-second burn of the attitude control thrusters. In radio communications, mission control again switched to the call sign, Apollo 11. When the maneuver was completed, Armstrong and Aldrin removed the spacesuits they had been wearing since the previous day. The communications operator in Houston informed the astronauts that their flight was the main story in the world's press. Congratulatory telegrams from foreign leaders continued to flow into the White House. Soviet Prime Minister Alexei Kosygin conveyed his congratulations to the Apollo 11 crew and President Nixon through former U.S. Vice President Hubert Humphrey, who was visiting the USSR. The Soviet cosmonauts also issued a congratulatory statement.
At the start of Orbit 31, Apollo 11 fired its main engine over the moon's far side. The burn lasted 2 minutes, 28 seconds, committing the crew to a trajectory home.
Engine performance nominal.
With the burn complete, Earth lay ahead across the cislunar gulf.
Trajectory looks good, homeward bound.
Apollo 11, you are go on the return flight.
They turned the spacecraft to photograph the rapidly receding moon.
Beautiful, like a lantern in the dark.
They entered passive thermal control, a slow roll to balance temperatures.
We will take a 10-hour rest period.
The ship rotated quietly through the night. On the seventh day, July 22nd, they awoke to a changing sky. Apollo 11 crossed the boundary where Earth's pull exceeded the moon's.
Range 62,600 from the moon, 322,000 to Earth.
We have the morning news when you are ready.
Go ahead, Houston.
The world watched as the crew coasted home.
Only 4 countries have yet to inform citizens: China, North Korea, North Vietnam, and Albania. President Nixon departs this evening to greet you aboard USS Hornet after splashdown.
Recovery forces surged toward the splashdown zone.
And Luna 15 impacted Mare Crisium yesterday.
Roger, understand.
Home was drawing near. They performed Intermediate Course Correction 5, the first on the return leg.
Delta V small. Trim looks clean.
A nudge to thread the re-entry corridor.
Tracking shows you right down the center.
Before broadcasting, they oriented the ship to show Earth and Moon together.
For those watching, here are our companions. The moon behind us, the Earth ahead. These are sealed containers holding lunar material.
Mealtime. Ham pate on bread, space style. We try to keep crumbs under control. A quick gyroscope demo, courtesy of an empty can.
For the kids, this is how water behaves in 0G. We drink from a water pistol.
Millions tuned in to the broadcast from deep space. On July 23rd, they spoke to the world one last time from space.
This mission belongs to all who made it possible.
We thank the tens of thousands who worked for this day.
It has been our honor to fly the ship.
Their words reached every shore. Storms formed near the planned splashdown.
Splash point moved about 400 kilometers downrange.
They would use the capsule's aerodynamics to reach it. USS Hornet raced to the new recovery point. Return to Earth was assured.
July 24th. The final correction is waived. Service module separates, perilously close. Re-entry begins at 195.0306, blunt end first. Altitude 122 kilometers, speed 11 per second. "15 minutes to splashdown." Splashdown. 3 kilometers off target. 24 from Hornet. Mission time, 8 days, 3 hours, 18 minutes. Capsule inverts, bags inflate. Divers collar the ship. Quarantine begins. Quarantine begins, hatch disinfected, suits issued. Armstrong, Collins, Aldrin exit in sequence. Hatch sticks, Collins secures it. Hornet closes to 1.5 kilometers. Aboard Hornet at plus 63 minutes. Columbia follows 2 hours later, into the mobile quarantine facility. Nixon greets them.